Garage. In this video, I'll be working on the XRAY XB2C 22 edition, bag 7 or step 7, the final assembly. So let's get started. All right, now that we got everything out of the bag, we can start with the final assembly. And the first thing we're gonna do is get the linkage that's gonna go from the servo horn to the steering bell crank. So we're gonna need 2 rod ends, 1 pivot ball, the threaded rod, that's M3x8, and a 10mm ball stud, which I think is the only one that was in that bag. And this is not the ball stud that we need. It's going to be this black one. Trim any excess. So you're gonna thread in the threaded shaft and have 4mm exposed. Right at 4mm. Now we can go ahead and install the other rod end. And the holes are going to be 90 degrees apart. So one will be facing this direction, and then 90 degrees, and the other one will be facing that way. So now we can install the ball stud and the pivot ball. So this pivot ball is actually threaded. The quality doesn't look that great. Maybe some rust in there already, but take a note of the orientation, because this side, which is flanged, has the threads, and the other side, which is not flanged, does not have threads. So you're going to want to have the threaded side is going to be facing the servo horn. So the way that this is going to be oriented is, if the servo horn is over here, you want this ball stud to go in like that. The ball stud facing down and the flange on this side over here. So now we can get the servo mounted to the servo mount, and I'll be using this Protek 160 TBL. It's a nice servo, plenty of torque. It's got a short case, which is going to be perfect to keep everything kind of nice and light, give you a lot of room. So can't wait to put this on. Very nice quality. I'd highly recommend this. I've been using Protek fans in my race buggies, and they've been phenomenal. What's interesting in the kit is that the servo screw is not included, which, I mean, could be a big deal, could not be a big deal, just depends. I believe in some other kits they aren't included, so, but no biggie, we have one that came with the servo, so we're gonna go ahead and use it. So the Protek servo came with a metal servo horn, which I'm surprised because a lot of servos don't come with that. We can try to put it in, but we'll have to make sure that we have enough clearance for it. So now we're going to need the servo mounts, which are going to be these pieces here. We're going to need 4 and 3 by 8 millimeter screws. They're button head screws. These have some nubs on it, so I'm going to go ahead and trim that. Take note because there are some nubs on the bottom. Right here. So we just want to make sure that that is going to be facing the front of the vehicle on both sides, and the nubs are going to be facing down. So take note, if you're going to be using a short servo, the mount actually hits the servo wire going in, so might take a Dremel and just cut that out real quick and make sure that there's enough room to not put any stress on that wire. I don't think the way it is now it's gonna really make any difference, but I think for my own peace of mind, I might want to fix that. Installing the servo onto the servo mounts, we're going to need these 4 and 3 by 8 screws, as well as some shims, 3 millimeter by 6 by 1. It looks like the shim is actually just like a little washer, and it doesn't actually call out or say exactly which one it is, so you have to kind of guess, but it's basically shim S3.2, and you need 4 of those to install with the 4 screws that go into the servo mount. Remember, you're going into plastic, so you don't need to crank down on it too hard. Once it snugs up, it's pretty good. Kind of surprised that the mount, the servo mount, is plastic and not metal. You know, for me, from a design perspective, it would make more sense if it's metal and you can thread lock it, so that way the screws don't back out over time and make your steering sloppy, or you know, it could be a good failure point in a car. So I'm surprised that it's plastic and not metal. Also, considering, you know, short or low profile servos are common to use, in what I've seen, almost, you know, half the buggies that I've seen racing are using the 160 TBL, and so I'm kind of surprised that from a design perspective they didn't, you know, make this particular point cut out or something like that to account for the low profile servos. So what I'm going to do next off camera is I'm going to go plug this in to one of my vehicles to get the servo on and centered, and then I can install the servo horn. Alright, so I got the servo centered. Let's go ahead and take out the servo horn. The Protek one that came with the servo is a little bit too long, and it's going to hit this piece, so I'm not going to worry about using it for now. And the Protek is a 25 tooth servo, so we're going to use F. The horns are labeled for different teeth, so take note of that. So we're going to need to install this, so we know this is going to go straight up. We're going to need a M3 by 12 button head screw. We're also going to need a 4mm shim and a conical shim. Take note of the shims. There's two aluminum ones that are cylindrical. One is larger and one is smaller, so make sure you take note of that. You're going to be using the larger one. So now what we can do is insert this screw like that. And then the cylindrical shim, the conical shim, and then since this is going into metal, I'm going to add a little bit of Loctite. And remember, the flange side is gonna go towards the servo horn. And you'll use a 2mm driver to screw that in. And the ball stud is going to rotate, so you can use a 2.5mm driver on the ball stud to hold back up, and you can tighten that. Just get it snugged up and it should be good with that Loctite. Make sure everything is moving nice and smooth, and it is. So next we can go ahead and install the servo horn onto the servo and try to get it as vertical as you can. Looks like the teeth on this doesn't allow it. It's going to be off by a few degrees, which we can trim out. And then lastly, we can install the servo horn screw, and I'm just going to put a little bit of Loctite on it. So I've seen these back out quite a bit, so alright, that's snugged up. And now we can install this assembly onto the chassis, and take notice that before you do that, if it'll actually fit. It looks like my servo mounts are too close together. They need to be separated a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen these up just enough where I can adjust them. Then I'll do a test fit real quick. Make sure that the holes line up as they need to. So now we've got the proper spacing. We can go ahead and tighten. So now we can install this servo assembly onto the chassis itself. And so what we're gonna do next is we're gonna need two M3 by 10 countersunk screws. And then we're going to need two shims. One is going to be a 3 by 5 by 1, and the other one is going to be a 3 by 5 by 4. Okay. So let's go ahead and install the servo in place first, and then we can worry about getting the linkage installed. We've got the servo in place. You're going to install the 2 studs in the frontmost hole, and then the screws are going to go in the middle hole here and here. I can flip the car over and install the steering linkage. So first we're going to install the 3x5x1mm shim. Then we're going to install the 3x5x4mm shim. And then we're going to install the ball stud in this hole here on the bell crank. You don't need to crank down on it too hard since it's just going into plastic. Once it's snugged up, it's good. Interesting angle of the steering linkage from where it attaches onto the servo to where it goes in on the bell crank. Seems like a pretty steep angle, but it should be fine. Just kind of surprised at the angle it's at, and it's not, you know, more straight or parallel, I guess, to the chassis. It's at a pretty good angle, but should still work. Just kind of interesting to see it that way. All right, now we can install this top piece. Make sure it needs to be trimmed or sanded, so go ahead and do that now. So this installs onto these 2 pieces here, and on the front where the sway bar should go if you had a sway bar. But I'm not going to install one since it didn't come with the kit. And we're going to need 2 M3x10mm cap screws and 4 M3x12mm cap screws. So the 4 M3x12 we'll install here, and the 2 M3x10s we'll install in the front over here. And just go ahead and get them all started first to make sure you can get everything aligned, and then you can go back and tighten everything down. It's going into plastic, so I don't need to crank down on these. Once it's shouldered up, it's good. So I already see a potential problem. It looks like that steering linkage is rubbing on this top plate here. So either that or it's definitely rubbing. So I'm going to do some research about that and see what I can do to fix it. But for now, I'll just leave it like that and continue with the build. Okay, now we can install the front shock tower and note the orientation. The one side is going to be pretty much flat, and the front side is going to have countersunk holes for the screws that we're going to use to attach it. So take note of that. We're going to need 4 M3x10 countersunk screws. For a luxury kit, pretty disappointed in the quality. Just noticed that this metal shaving was in the kit, you know, just in the parts kit. And that's not the first one I've seen. There's more. There's another one right there. So kind of disappointed that they claim to be a luxury kit, and I'm just, for the price, I don't see it. So just a bit disappointed. So note the orientation and install the screws into the front upper deck. I'm going to start them all first and make sure that they all line up, and then I'll go back and tighten them all down. And you're going into plastic, so you don't need to tighten down too hard, because you could potentially damage, you can potentially strip the plastic or crack this carbon fiber piece. The next step is going to be to install the front shocks. So we're going to need a few different pieces. We're going to need 2 M3x22 cap screws. We're also going to need 2 M3 nuts. They're going to be lock nuts. We're going to need 2 shock standoffs. Actually, we're going to need 2 more lock nuts, so it's going to be a total of 4 lock nuts. So we're going to take note of the initial settings for the carpet setup. So there's 6 holes for the shocks on each side, and we're going to install it on the 3rd hole from the outside. And then on the control arm, we're going to install on the innermost hole on the arm. And that's going to be the same for the carpet or the dirt setup. Take note of the orientation. There's a long side and a short side. The short side is going to go through the shock tower. And then on the back side, you'll install the nut. And it is a 7mm on the standoff. You don't need to crank down on it too hard, because you could damage the shock tower. So just get it snugged up and it should be good. Now we can install the front shocks. The front shocks are the shorter ones. And take note of how they're going to install. They're going to install with the flange So you have a flange. This flange is going to be facing the front of the vehicle, and the non-flange side is going to be going onto the standoff first. And I like to have the bleeder screws facing up in case you want to bleed your shocks while they're on the car. And on the bottom, the orientation of this ball stud is the large flange side will be facing the front of the vehicle. So take note of that. So both flanges facing the front of the vehicle. So we can go ahead and install. And install the lock nut first, because it'll give you a little bit more room to wiggle the shock around so you can get a wrench in on the top. If not, if you install the bottom first, you won't be able to get a wrench in there. So take note of that. Okay. And And you're going to go in the innermost hole and install the screw from the back side of the control arm. Now we can move on to the rear and install the standoffs and shocks in the rear. So in the rear, we've got 4 holes in the shock tower, and the stock setup for carpet is going to be the second hole from the outside, and it looks like the control arms are slightly different between the carpet and the dirt car, so take note of that. It's going to install on the inside right here. So we're going to need 2 shock standoffs, 4 M3 lock nuts, and 2 M3 by 14 screws. So we're going to install the standoff in the second hole from the outside. With the standoffs installed, we can install the shocks now, and again take note of the orientation. We're going to have the flange on the top facing the front of the vehicle, but on the bottom of the shock, the flange will be facing the rear of the vehicle. So take note of that. And so we've got the flange up front, we've got our bleeder screw facing the outside of the car. We can go ahead and install that. Flange on the front, bleeder screw on the outside. Remember the orientation on the bottom. We want the big flange to be facing the rear of the car. And for the carpet setup, we're going to be on the innermost hole. And remember, you're going to plastic, so you don't need to crank down on it too hard. Once it's snugged up, it's good. The big flange right here, going to be facing the rear of the car. Innermost hole. And remember, you're going into plastic, so don't need to crank down on it too hard. Once it's snug, it's good. All right. Now we can install the motor. And we're going to need 2 M3 by 6 cap head screws. Kind of surprised that they don't want any washers on these. Got a nice, beautiful Hobby Wing V10 G3 7.5 turn motor. Very nice quality. Can't wait to see how fast this thing's gonna be. This is just meant to be a little ridiculous and just to have fun. Not gonna be racing it in any particular class, so we'll see how it turns out. Comes with 2 sensor bars, a very short one and a longer one, so probably need the longer one. Leave that out. I'm gonna go ahead and install a little bit of blue Loctite onto these screws. Just get a little bit of excess off on these paper towels. Got 1 screw installed. Going to go ahead and install the next screw. The side rail looks like it doesn't allow me to put the screw in straight. I've got the motor moved all the way back since I don't know how small of a pinion I might use. So this will allow me to put the ESC where I want to and route it to where I might have the longest wires possible with this motor installed. So that's why I have it pushed all the way back. And go ahead and install the chassis brace that goes here. It's 2 pieces. So for this step, we're going to need 2 M3 by 10 millimeter screws, a M3 by 16 millimeter screw, a pivot ball, and 2 M3 by 8 countersunk screws. And take note of the orientation of this piece. There's actually a rounded section on one of the sides. That's going to be the back side. That way it allows clearance for the motor. Go ahead and get that little pivot ball installed. So the 2 M3 by 10 are going to go in like so. And take note of the orientation. This brace, this part goes towards the back, and it's going to be on the same side as the rounded feature on the bottom of the brace. Now we need the M3 by 16, and it's going to install from this side, go through the pivot ball, and we're going to go ahead and tighten it down, and this should hopefully close up the gap in the transmission that's over here. And there we go. Now at this point I wouldn't install the bottom yet. What I'd like to do is actually feed the sensor wire underneath the brace and through the channel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this cover that they have on the sensor wire, so that way I can actually lay the sensor wire completely flat in this channel, so that way the battery doesn't rub on it. Just be patient and do this slowly so you don't end up cutting the actual sensor wire. I'm gonna go ahead and install the sensor wire into the motor, and that way I can figure out how I'm going to route. So I'm gonna take a little bit of Gorilla Tape. So my plan is to try and tape this as far back as possible. So that way I can get it in the channel as early as possible. Okay, so now we can have better access. Try to get all the wires flat and close together so they'll fit within the channel. Just like that. Okay, there we go. Now I can reinstall the brace. And now I can install the 2 M3 by 8 countersunk screws on the bottom. And they're going to install in the forward 2 holes. So now we can prepare the battery strap system. Looks like we've got these 2 pieces here. Looks like some trimming is necessary. So we're going to need the M3 nuts that are not lock nuts. We're going to need 2 M3 by 25 screws. We're going to need the battery strap as well. And these are going to need to be trimmed. And we're also going to need 2 M3x8 threaded studs like those. Alright, so we're going to take the M3 nuts and screw them on. Well, before we do that, I know I'm going to be using a 6,000 milliamp hour battery. So the standard battery pack, you want to utilize this flat section is going to be facing up. If you're using a low CG pack, then you have to flip it. So let's go ahead and thread this through. And you're not going to be tightening this down all the way. So I'm probably going to leave about 2 millimeters from the top. Next we can install the M3 nut. And the setup is recommending that we install the battery all the way back. Take note, because these battery pieces here that hold it down front and back actually are directional, so you need to make sure that you match them up so they're facing in the same direction. So this is as far back as we can get the battery because of the brace. And we're going to need to install the stud. And I'm going to install the stud in the frontmost hole. And you just tighten gently. And I just have it just below the top. Make sure you match up, make sure the strap is in the same orientation. Now I'm going to go ahead and install this into the middle hole. You want to be able to turn this battery hole down 1 turn, so that way you can adjust. Go ahead and tighten the bottom nut, kind of hold that in place. And so that should be good for now. Tighten down this nut. Now it's pretty secure. Now I can install these foam pieces for the battery, and they're much longer than they need to be, so I'm going to go ahead and cut them. I know that I can't go further back than this point, so there's no point in putting foam back here, so I'll just make sure that it covers the channel from the brace to the front. Got some alcohol on a towel and just make sure there's no oils or dirt that might prevent the adhesive to stick. So that's pretty much it mechanically for the build. The last thing that I'm going to need to install is the ESC and receiver, but for the most part it's done mechanically. Got to cut out the body. I mean, the body's off to the painter, but the only thing that's left is cut out the wing, install that, not too big of an issue, and then install the ESC, wheels and tires, the Velcro for the body, and that's pretty much it. But for the most part, it's all done mechanically. Hope you found this helpful, found something that might be of use to you. Please leave any comments down below if you have any suggestions, comments, or tips to help not just me but some other people that are doing this build. And thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. It does help the channel. I'll see y'all in the next one, where I compile all my notes on my experience with the build, and I will tell you my review and my experiences with this kit, and hopefully that'll help some of y'all make a decision on whether or not you want to buy this kit. Anyway, I'll see y'all in the next one. Thanks for watching.